Okay. Hello, everybody. Let's make a start. So, welcome everyone for coming this afternoon. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Dr. Richard Benjamin, and I'm a senior lecturer in contemporary museum practice in the history department, but I'm also the co-director of the Centre for the Study of International Slavery, and some of my colleagues Mary and Phil are with us here today as well. I'll be introducing our guest speaker, Dr. Mark Christian, in a few moments, and Mark will be talking about Frederick Douglass on women and rights. But a little bit about CSIS, Centre for the Study of International Slavery. It's its 20th anniversary year, 2006. It was set up alongside the International Slavery Museum, of which some of you might know, some friendly faces in the audience. I was the head of that museum until 2021. So it's a partnership between National Museums Liverpool and the University of Liverpool, predominantly within the history department. It's based and supports and shares leading research about human enslavement and its legacies, and up to date it's held numerous events and annual lectures. At the end of today's talk, I'll give you a shout out to a couple of other events that you can actually sign up to that are forthcoming, and actually I've been told as well there's some posters all around the walls that have QR codes, so you can sign up to them. So thank you, Phil, for that as well. But I'll make an announcement at the very end. Mark's going to speak for about 30 to 45 minutes. We've got some flexibility, and there'll be a short period of Q&A after that as well. So the presentation today is going to focus on Frederick Douglass as a pioneer for women's rights from 1848 until his death in 1895. It will also consider why he supported the cause of women's rights from the outset of his career as an ardent enslavement abolitionist. And Mark obviously will go into greater detail there. But a little bit about our speaker, for those of you who've not maybe met or heard Mark before. Dr. Mark Christian is a tenured and full professor at the City University of New York, the Lehman campus in the Bronx. He joined them in August 2011 from Miami University of Ohio. He received his BA Honours in Sociology and American Studies from Liverpool Hope University, his MA in Africana Black Studies from the Ohio State University, and his PhD in Sociology from the University of Sheffield, which is in my part of the world. Dr. Christian was a senior Fulbright Scholar recipient with the Department of Pan-African Studies at Kent State University, and a former research fellow at the University of London's Commonwealth Institute. He was a board member of the National Council for Black Studies between 2006 and 2008. He's the author of 2 award-winning biographies on Frederick Douglass, 2025, and Booker T. Washington, 2021, along with other key publications such as Transatlantic Slavery, Shades of the Black Atlantic, 2022, and the 20th Century Civil Rights Movement and Africana Studies Perspective, 2021. He's been the guest editor of 3 special issue journals in his discipline. He was also the book review editor of the Journal of African American Studies, 2007-2014. And I know there's lots of things you're working on, Mark, and you'll be able to tell us a little bit more about it, but one thing I'll mention here is you're currently working on a critical biography on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., 1929 to 1968. I hope I've got most of those dates correct. So I'm now going to pass you over to our speaker. So please, a warm welcome to Dr. Mark Christian.
How much do I owe you? How much do I owe you?
20 will do it for old time's sake.
Well, it's always nice to come home. Wow. So listen, thank you all for coming out today, because you could all be in 1,000 other places. I am aware of that. There's so much distraction today, so it's, the guys filming this, so I've got to stay calm, stay in one place. Okay, I've got you, cameraman. So I wanted to kind of take a trip down memory lane. I was last here about 4 years ago. I think it was 4 years ago. And a young man texted me after and said, Dr. Christian, you spoke a lot about the Charles Wooten. Where was it? And I went, my God, the generation has passed on, and the new generation has to relearn what we knew so well. Because the Charles Wooten was my life. I had a 20-year relationship with the Charles Wooten. And because of that, I wanted just to introduce myself, because I'm home in that context. I wanted to share with you a poem I wrote for the Charles Wooten magazine back in 1995, which is now more than a generation ago. So let me read this for you, and then, now some of the symbolism in here, some of you will know, some of you may not know, but let's see how this goes. It's called, What is Black? Black has always been more than just a color. It is the politics of cultural resistance. Amilcar Cabral, Return to the Source. Kwame Nkrumah, Africa Must Unite. Muhammad Ali, the epitome and practice in power and pride. Jomo Kenyatta, Mau Mau Uprising. All symbols of blackness. The struggle and hope of many peoples. I am because they were because they were and are black. W.E.B. Du Bois, One Ever Knows His Two-ness. Booker T and Marcus Garvey, black is all shades and all contradictions. Black is the rhythm of time and consciousness. Justice for Rodney, Patrona and Joy. Who are they to judge us? Marvin Gaye. And like Maya Angelou, know why the cage bird sings. The idea is the seed of action, young and old together. Liberation is global in scope. See more than your locale. Seek more than a wage. Comprehend the past, present, and future. They are cyclical, inseparable, to the knowledge that, pause, black has always been more than just a color. So I thought I would introduce myself to that, because we are between this color, white, and between this color, black. There's a lot in between. I mean, if a white person stood up, you are not white. I'm not black. But between these two colors, there's so much racialized experience that we've all faced over centuries. So that takes me into Frederick Douglass. I could have stayed with Liverpool for the whole session, but we don't have the time. I will say this: how did I get into Frederick Douglass? Well, most people know Frederick Douglass from this autobiography. It's first published in 1845. This was the autobiography that he wrote when he was about 27 years of age. And he came to Liverpool first at the age of 27 to escape enslavement, because he was a fugitive. And the white abolitionists in America said, you better go to Britain, because you will be in danger having published this autobiography, which talks about his time in enslavement. Now, if you do know Frederick Douglass, you're likely to know him through his 1845 autobiography. But you should know that he wrote 3 others and many editions. The second edition is My Bondage, My Freedom, and it takes me to, I'm going to be a bit like jazz. I'm going to take you here, there, and everywhere, and then back again, yeah? Because it takes me to the first woman who was very empowering in his life. And I'm also got this PowerPoint here. We'll look at Frederick. This is my biography of Frederick Douglass. It's available today. I think most of you have a copy already, I'm sure. Exactly. Okay. But it's available, and it's been reviewed quite positively. This is Frederick Douglass when he was young. A lot of people don't know this Frederick Douglass. They see the old man Douglass. And I think if we were to revamp black history, I would say put away the old Frederick Douglass and allow the young one to come through. He's in his 20s here. And he escaped enslavement at the age of 20. Just giving you some context if you don't know Frederick Douglass very well. But you can see he was a handsome dude. He stood about 6'2", which is exactly my size. And he had that afro, that look, and he was a brilliant, brilliant orator and went on to be a brilliant writer as well as in word. Just giving you some context here. And the woman, the second biography was called My Bondage, My Freedom. And it was published in 1855, which was 10 years after his first autobiography. And that was largely helped and edited by a woman called Julia Griffiths. And she was a white woman from Britain. She went on to marry a priest afterwards and became Julia Griffith Crofts. Janet, my sister. All right. So, Julia Griffiths, who is she? Who is Julia? So I'm going to introduce you to women along the way, because she was very important. When he came over, he was extremely charismatic across the British Isles, giving lectures and selling the copy of his book. There's a Dublin edition as well. A guy called Richard Webb was the publisher. I'm giving you some context here with the life he escaped. He escaped enslavement, hunger, all of those emotional stress, all is in his first autobiography. The second one, he talks about his freedom, and that's where I came in. I read the second autobiography, not the first. The first one I read was My Bondage, My Freedom, 10 years after the first, and then I read the first. And if it wasn't for Julia Griffiths, who was an abolitionist, a white woman abolitionist, and American writers don't tend to make a big deal of Julia in terms of the impact she had on Frederick Douglass. And she's a very interesting person because she was about 7 years older than Frederick. She was single. And the historians say she dressed very eccentric. I don't know what that means for 1850, 1849, 1850s. But it tells me she was a woman of substance. She was a woman with self-confidence. And she traveled 3,000 miles on a steamship because she'd met Frederick during his first tour of Britain in 1845. So she had an impact on him for her to travel. She traveled over with her sister, but her sister then went off to Canada. And she worked with Frederick. And Frederick was struggling then. I'm jumping ahead here, with Fred. I'm doing a bit of jazz, going, So you got to stay with me. Now, obviously, you'll all read my biography after this anyway. I can see you queuing up at the bookstore. But Julia met Frederick while he was giving his first lectures. And it's in that context they became friends. And when, in Britain, Frederick was so successful on his tour that people fell in love with the white abolitionists of Britain fell in love with him. I'll go past this if you don't mind. These are some important people in his life. I'm going to come back to Julia, but you got to know about Anna Murray. I'm going to throw in names. Anna Murray was his first wife. They stayed together. Good to see you, man. For 44 years they were married, his first wife. And she helped him escape. She made him a sailor's suit. she gave him the wherewithal. She gave him the strength. She was born free. So she gave him a lot of strength. And she was also 5 years older than Frederick. But they met in Baltimore. And again, this guy here, William Lloyd Garrison, was the white guy in America that got him on the stage. When he first spoke at the age of 23, he was shaking like a leaf. But apparently he did a brilliant job then too. And then he went on to be a lecturer, and that's how he got his start as an orator. That's 1841, and he was about 23. He meets his wife in Baltimore. She helps him escape. Okay, so this is his second wife, Helen Pitt, but it's further down the road and it's more controversial. I'm going to come back to John Bright, but these two women are very important too, and I'll bring Julia back in a minute. I'm just trying to introduce you to these people. Anna and Ellen Richardson were two Quaker women from Britain, and they were the key people behind raising the funds for Frederick's freedom. He cost to the so-called slave master £150, and I did that inflation thing. That would be about $28,000 in our money, 2024. So a fair amount of money. Now, some of the abolitionists said, "Frederick, what are you doing? You are already free. You have no right to allow this sale to go through." This was a guy called Henry Wright, who was a cool guy, white dude, abolitionist and a feminist for his day. But what he didn't understand was, and this is how brilliant Frederick was. He said, and this Henry Wright wrote to Frederick saying, "You shouldn't be buying your freedom, Frederick. You're already free. You're born free." Frederick said, "Henry, I like how you're coming here, but my friend, you don't like the passport system. You feel we all have a God-given right to travel the world wherever we want to go without a passport. All I'm achieving is my passport for freedom so that I won't be snatched back into enslavement." You see, it was brilliant analysis, and I've never seen the letters put back to back. Henry Wright's letter and then Frederick Douglass's response. I couldn't find them, only in the Liberator of 1847. So both of them are part of my biography in the documents at the back. And I'm just trying to show you that he went and paid off Hugh Auld for his freedom, Frederick Douglass. And he was about 28 years of age when he come back to America. And the British, by the way, a lot of American writers don't give these women the kudos they deserve, as when Anna and Ellen Richardson. And they were from Newcastle and gave Frederick Douglass, and by the way, so I have to go back. This guy here, John Bright, gets no mention in the latest biography. Pulitzer-winning prize, Yale scholar David Blight wrote a biography. Never mentions, it's not even in the index, John Bright. Why am I getting excited? I'm getting excited because John Bright was an aristocrat. He was a landowner, but he was very progressive. And he was from Rochdale. And Frederick Douglass went 11 times to speak in Rochdale. Remember, he only spoke here twice. Once in 1846, October the 19th, and then again in 1860, if we can get to that. But I'm trying to get women in, John Bright in, and it's not easy trying to do all this. But John Bright I have to mention because he's not mentioned much by the Americans. Some British scholars have mentioned him, but I really went into his history. Why? because he put up £50 for Frederick's £150, meaning he put a third of the cost to buy Frederick's freedom. It's significant. For him not to be mentioned in a Pulitzer-winning prize biography, that's a massive oversight. This man, John Bright, was an MP, and he was against the Corn Laws. You know, he was for the Irish people as well. You see, you got to go back to 1845. Oh, by the way, their friendship lasted almost 40 years because John Bright wrote the introduction to Frederick's final autobiography in 1881. And he wrote the introduction. That's almost 40 years of friendship, just to give you. And 11 times he spoke in Rochdale. So you know about these two women. They were Quakers, by the way, and John Bright had Quaker background also. This guy, Richard Webb, was the publisher of the Dublin edition of the first autobiography. This woman here I raise because I don't want you going away thinking all white people are great and they are. But you have to understand, this is the American abolitionist, Maria Weston Chapman. She was an abolitionist. But you've got to understand, a lot of the abolitionists they wanted the end of enslavement, but they did not necessarily believe in equality. You see? There's that white liberal scenario. I'm sorry if I'm going to step on someone's toes. I'm trying to give you history with some analysis. So Mary Weston, she writes to him behind Frederick's back saying, look out for Frederick because he may get allured into his head may get big because of all the attention. Slightly patronizing. And again, in the history books, Frederick writes back to Maria Weston and Chapman, and it's worth looking into, okay? So she's a good woman, but she doesn't believe in him as well, you see? There's that, you know, you've got paternalism and you've got maternalism, yeah? So, and that's the human condition. We are not perfect people, even if we're doing some perfect things, some right. Let me hammer home that other issue as well of the white abolitionist. The white abolitionist, Gideon Pitts, was the father of Helen Pitts, his second wife in 1884. Gideon Pitts was an abolitionist. He knew Frederick quite well. But once his daughter got with Frederick to get married, and she was 46, she was a spinster, Frederick, Gideon Pitts discarded both of them. You see? So there we have the white abolitionist, but don't marry my daughter, you know? You see, it's tricky. It's a tricky thing. But I can't stay there because we're in the women. This guy, Gerard Smith, was another cool guy. He helped John Brown. You've all heard of John Brown, haven't you? Yeah. I can't go there, but this is John Brown. Malcolm X said we need a few more John Browns. I could go further there. These were two heroes of Frederick Douglass's. I can't stay here, but James McCune Smith was the first African American to receive a medical degree. And this guy here, I call him Huggy Bear. Remember Huggy Bear from the 70s? He was a hairdresser. I mean, look at that. Look at that for a hairstyle. And we're talking the 1850s. I mean, he's brilliant. And he was a brilliant speaker. And he was, Frederick Douglass named one of his sons after Charles Lennox Remond. And he had a sister, Sarah, who again, we could have had a whole lecture about. These two other guys were important. James Pennington married Frederick and his first wife, Anna, in 1838. Martin Delaney was one of the first black nationalists, and he worked with Frederick on the North Star. We can't stay there because we're going to focus on women. These two beautiful women, Frederick writes a letter very humbly because Harriet Tubman got in touch with him. A white woman was writing her autobiography with her, alongside her. And she asked for Frederick to endorse it. And she said, Frederick said, I don't need to endorse you. You need to endorse me. It's a very humble letter. And again, it's in the biography and it's in the history. If you want to look at it yourself, you would say Frederick Douglass to Harriet Tubman, 1868. And you will find a beautiful letter from Frederick Douglass. And Sojourner Truth, she was another black abolitionist speaker and a contemporary, a little bit older than Frederick. Sarah Parker Remond, I mentioned her brother, Charles. She's brilliant, and she was a speaker in a time when black women were not allowed to speak, and she was an abolitionist too. By the way, Charles, her brother, and Sarah, they were born free, so they weren't enslaved. So don't make that mistake as well. Often we think back then all black people were enslaved. They weren't. Some were born free, and these were free people who went on the abolitionist cause. Because I think it was Martin Luther King who may have said, it's no good if I'm not who I am or you are not who you should be, then that diminishes me. And this is what's happening with these blacks who were free. They were fighting for their enslaved brothers and sisters. So I hope you're making notes of these brilliant women. Sarah Parker Remond. One of my favorites, Ida B. Wells. Why is she important to Frederick Douglass? She was a fighter against lynching, and she was also a strong feminist. But she was a mentee of Frederick Douglass. In fact, Frederick Douglass, she came to his home. And this is the tricky part, because a lot of black women were upset that Frederick in 1884 married a white woman. And Ida B. Wells was a strong black woman, but she writes about being in the household of Frederick Douglass and seeing the way they treated each other with such love, which went beyond race, you see. You see, once because we're all racialized, yeah? Once we get beyond race, there's the humanity, you know, and it's getting over that historical context of race and racism. That's a problem. But Ida B. Wells put aside her black, feminist, strong mind to say, hang on a minute, I would have liked Frederick too to have married in one of his own people, but I could see something beyond race that was beautiful. Okay? And Frederick, in turn, was very thankful to Ida, and he also helped her set up her tour of Britain in 1893 and 1895. Ida B. Wells came through Liverpool to give an anti-lynching tour. She was mentored by Frederick Douglass, who also wrote, because of her, about anti-lynching, one of his last speeches before he died. Okay? I can't stay here, but a brilliant poet was mentored by Frederick Douglass, Paul Laurence Dunbar. He died young of tuberculosis, but he was a great poet. He wrote that poem, We Wear the Mask. You know, I've got friends over there in the States who still wear the mask, you know? Hey. So it's a beautiful poem. If you want to know Paul Laurence Dunbar, start with We Wear the Mask. These two women, the Edmondson sisters, escaped enslavement. And you see a young Frederick Douglass, the one on the right there, the right, sorry, it'd be your left, yeah. Frederick Douglass is a young man there. Gerrit Smith is the white guy, a very strong abolitionist, and the two women who had escaped. But Frederick, although free, is now helping other enslaved. And this, so the Edmund sisters, one of them died young again of tuberculosis, so, and the other lived a little bit into adult. Now these two, this is very interesting. Douglass and women. So Frederick Douglass, from the early part of his oration career, if we like, as a speaker, was shoulder to shoulder with women, with the cause of women's suffrage and women's empowerment. And two of the women, very strong in his day, was Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. And just to give you an indication, who does women's studies in this group? Any of you do women's studies? No, I see blank faces, okay. All right, moving on. So, have you heard of Seneca Falls, 1848? Seneca Falls meeting? Oh, okay, great, I'm not. That's all I need. I only need one. Teen, help me out. Okay. So 1848, women got together in Seneca Falls, New York, 1848 July, to meet for the empowerment of women in America. Frederick Douglass was one of the delegates, and he stood next to Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who said women have the right and should pursue the vote. Frederick Douglass seconded her. He was 30 years of age. He then went to write an article in the North Star to empower women as well. You could find that in the primary documents. So Frederick Douglass, at the age of 30, is shoulder to shoulder with women. Gets tricky, because around 1868 to 1870, there was the Reconstruction era. Enslavement had been abolished in 1865. And by 1868 is this push for the vote of black males. And Frederick, obviously, his life was given to the end of enslavement and the empowerment of his people. He was pushing for the black male vote. Again, women were still subjugated at this time for the vote. And these two women, that's when they had a little problem with Frederick Douglass. He said, well, white women should get the vote before, hey. And that's, so they fell out, kind of, for a while. And the black male got the vote in 1870. They got the vote in writing, but were blocked from voting most of the time, and it took another 100 years for that to collapse to somewhat. And now they've collapsed the Voting Rights Act again in 2015. But that's another story. I'm in history now. We're walking through history. So these two women were very strong with Frederick, got upset with him when black men were going to get the vote because they felt white women should be ahead of them. And that's when it becomes tricky. But they can't...
Sorry, was it Susan Anthony that ran for president?
Yeah, Susan B. Anthony, I'm not sure about that, but it wouldn't surprise me. I know she voted against the law of women should not vote and refused to pay the fine. That she ran for president is a possibility, but I'm not down that road with Susan B. Anthony. I haven't followed as closely that, but it wouldn't surprise me. I like Susan B. Anthony. I stood by her grave, and she's buried in the same cemetery as Frederick Douglass. So Susan B. Anthony, she had a lot of spice. I like women with spice to fight. Out of the two, Susan B. Anthony for me is the cool one. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, okay. But Susan B. Anthony, took Frederick to his last talk, and his last talk was to empower white women in February the 20th, 1895. That was his last speech. He died that day, and she took him, she guided him up to the stage for him to be, again, empowering women. See, so they come back together over time. I'm back to Julia. I mentioned her before. Now it gets tricky. There's some scholars saying that Frederick may have had a relationship with Julia Crofts. What do I think? I think if a woman came 3,000 miles to see me in America on a boat, on a steamship that took 12 days, and she stayed with me for 5 years, and we sat opposite each other, and she worked out all my funding, she got my house in order, the mortgage paid, she got lots of funding in for the North Star, I think we'd be having more than fish and chips. You know, but hey. That's just me then, see? You see, I always get into trouble, Theo, but there are other people who walk that way, and I think she was 7 years older than Frederick as well, and she was a little eccentric. That all, you know, it's like this and like that and like this and that. You know, it's, I think they read more than poetry. Ottilie Assing, now there's a lot of historians that point very strongly. She was a German immigrant. She was a journalist. She came to Frederick's home. She was a little bit pushy because Anna was around. Anna, his first wife, couldn't read or write, which was a terrible impediment for a man who had such a passion for reading and writing. So Frederick, although he loved his wife, he fell into a depression when Anna died. But Ottilie Assing would spend summers in the Douglass home, and they had a relationship for 25 years. She committed suicide in a Parisian park and had the letters burnt between them and left at least half of her estate to Frederick Douglass. Now, what do you think? Again, you see, a lot of white historians won't go with this interracial thing, and they kind of sidestep it, you know? And I'm more, I try to seek truth, but you know, Plato said the most hated person is the person who speaks truth. And he was talking about his mentor, probably Socrates, who got killed for, you know, corrupting the youth. But what I would say, again, that Ottilie Assing, he used to go to see her in Hoboken, stay in the same house but in another room, apparently. You know, I don't know. I'm not. So Julia and Ottilie, definitely a question mark there. I would lean towards the romantic side, okay? Again, you know, if you're going to have a go at Frederick Douglass, he was married. You know, they do that with Martin Luther King as well, by the way. But, you know, human beings are human beings, you know? But there was a lot of gossip. Quickly, Frederick Douglass fell out with his mentor, William Lloyd Garrison, around when he started the North Star. He went off on his own, away from the Liberator, and that upset a few of the white abolitionists, and they started gossip about Julia being in the house, you see? And it was, and Frederick got upset about that, and Julia came back to Britain. 5 years later, she married and became Crofts. But she looked after Frederick when Frederick came over again in 1860. So, yeah, I think Frederick had a, you know, had a great life. So women abolitionists and Frederick Douglass, these are other women you should keep hold of. This lady who I've really highlighted, Abby Kelly, she's very important because she was, again, she had spunk. She stood on anti-slavery platforms with Frederick in the 1840s. And that was very brave for a young white woman. Again, Quaker origin. And she was married. I don't believe there's anything going on there. But Ottilie Assing and Julia Griffiths, very much likely. All these other women, Angelina Grimke, Sarah Grimke, was known as the mother of suffrage, the mother of the movement. You know, Frederick is shoulder to shoulder fighting and writing for women's rights. Now, this relationship is interesting. You've all heard of Harriet Beecher Stowe, I'm sure. Uncle Tom's Cabin, yeah? That was like $1 million seller, yeah? Over here as well. And she wrote to Frederick and said, look, what can I do for the African American people? And he said, what we need is a trade school, a vocational school. And you see, Frederick Douglass is known as an integrationist, but a trade school for African Americans is leaning towards self-determination and segregation. Now, a lot of his peers, his black peers, were against him and starting a school because they wanted integration. It's interesting. But Harriet Beecher Stowe was, and there's letters to her and back and that you can read, and I went into that part of it. But his black peers were against him developing a school for African Americans because they wanted integration, the intellects of his day, okay? Now, later, Booker T. Washington, because I've studied Booker T. Washington quite in-depthly, and he took on the vocational school, you see? So in a way, Frederick Douglass is the father of Booker T. Washington intellectually and W.E.B. Du Bois, but I can't go into that. I've gone into it in the biography. I'll just give you some of Frederick's children so that you know something about his children. His first child was Rosetta, called Rosetta, and she wrote about her mother. She's the only person who has an in-depth insight into Anna, the wife of Frederick Douglass for 44 years. Two of his sons, I don't know whether you know this, Lewis and Charles, fought in the Civil War. They were in, you know that movie where Denzel got the Oscar? It's called Glory. Anybody? Yeah. Well, Frederick Douglass's sons were in that regiment, the 54th, and they're not depicted in the movie. Frederick Douglass is, but not his sons. Interesting. Annie Douglass, this is a sad story. Annie Douglass was the fifth child and very young, and she died at the age of 10, probably of meningitis. Sadly, Frederick had to leave America in 1859 after the John Brown raid on Harper's Ferry because he was being implicated as one of the instigators of that raid. He wasn't. He said it was a suicide mission. He loved John Brown and he praised him. But Frederick Douglass had to come to England to get away from America to save himself. Sadly, while he was away, little Annie died, and it broke his heart, and he came back to America straight away in 1860. She died in March, I think something like 10 days before her 11th birthday. She's buried next to her mother and Frederick Douglass in Mount Hope Cemetery, Rochester, New York. Okay, so this is me researching. We don't have to go into that. But this was the little room that he used to write in. It's called a growlery, where you growl, you know, you can let off steam. Apparently it comes from Charles Dickens, that phrase. I'm at the cemetery there where Frederick is, and we went out for a bevy, me and Frederick, here in New York. He was a bit stiff then, though, but I did my best. Okay, all right, and that's me. I'm actually at the cemetery of my grandparents. They're about at the back there to the right. My grandparents from Jamaica are buried in Columbus, Ohio. And I found out after I got my PhD that one of my grandparents, George Rupert Christian, worked with Marcus Garvey. How about that? Yeah, it's a true. So you see, my DNA has this passion for Black history, and that's what I've tried to share. What else about women that's very important? 1848. Okay, women. So the very last day, Frederick is speaking for the empowerment of women in Washington, D.C. And apparently one of the women could see him touching his arm a lot. He's fidgeting with his left arm. I read it in a primary document. And he gets home, and he's talking with his new wife there, Helen. Now, they'd been together 11 years, Helen. And they're outside ready to go on to another speaking engagement. And he just collapsed and died there and then on his doorstep. So he died quickly of a severe heart attack, Frederick Douglass. Now, what I was going to do, if you don't mind, I was going to read a poem, because in this biography, you know, editors, they tell you how to write and what they want. And they said, could you, Mr. Christian, write a chapter on why Frederick Douglass matters? I said, all right, love. And I said, so in their day, they used to write poetry. You know the likes of William Lloyd Garrison and all of that. When they wrote an article, they infused it with poetry. Like we have a lovely audience here today, by the way. But you know, back in the day, when Frederick Douglass spoke, he spoke in a place called Concert Hall. The building is still there on Lord Nelson Street. It's made into a block of luxury apartments. Lord Nelson Street, Concert Hall. October 19, 1846, 2,500 people came out that night. Now, this is Liverpool. This is a slave port, and that's 1846. Very interesting. Okay, this is my poem to Frederick Douglass, and we close out and have some questions then, yeah? All right. So look, dear Frederick Douglass, your flight from enslavement to freedom still inspires. Orator, writer, abolitionist, newspaper editor, political guru. Strength of character beyond human endurance, guided by African ancestors. Gone almost 70 years, but still being read. You'd be surprised by the changes that have occurred since you left us. Motor cars, planes, submarines, and many more toys for global warfare. Crestfallen. We still encounter racialized enmity and mendacious politicians, creating division, xenophobia, and political mayhem. Your absence is felt more than you could imagine. Black folks, kin folks, and a few white folks too. There are despicable politicians banning your books, fearing your words of wisdom, even in the 21st century. Detractors and naysayers give prescription to African American history. The need for your insight and sagacity is keen. Things have changed, but remain the same. You are missed, Frederick Douglass. Martin and Malcolm came after you, others in between. But no one could ever replace you. The essence of courage, commitment, and conviction. An African American in American history. Thank you. Thank you.